Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1879. Robert Esterházy stood at the window of his study, watching as the carriage bearing his betrothed rolled through the gates of his estate. His breath created a small circle of fog on the glass, obscuring for a moment the stark reality approaching him. 28 years old, and finally bowing to the inevitable, a marriage arranged to strengthen his family's position in the Austro-Hungarian court. "Your Excellency," his valet said from the doorway, "the Countess Cellini's party has arrived." Robert straightened his jacket, a perfectly tailored garment in the latest fashion, and smoothed his dark hair. His reflection in the window glass showed a man with stern features, softened only by eyes that betrayed a certain melancholy. "Very well, Horvath. I shall receive them in the grand salon." The house had been prepared for days. Servants had polished every surface until the marble floors reflected like mirrors and the silver gleamed. Fresh flowers from the hothouses filled vases throughout the rooms, their fragrance mingling with beeswax and polish. All of it a stage for this moment, this union of two noble houses. As he descended the grand staircase, Robert reminded himself of the advantages. Countess Victoria Cellini was said to be well-educated, from a family with substantial landholdings in Hungary proper. Their marriage would cement the Esterházy position in both Austrian and Hungarian circles of the dual monarchy, a political necessity in these uncertain times. He entered the salon just as the butler announced, the Countess Victoria Cellini and her party. She entered first, a slender figure in a traveling dress of deep burgundy. Her blonde hair was arranged fashionably beneath a small hat adorned with a single feather. Robert bowed deeply as was proper, taking her gloved hand and bringing it to his lips. "Countess, welcome to Esterházy Palace." "Count Esterházy." Her voice was soft but assured. "Your home is as magnificent as I was told." Only when the formalities had been observed did Robert notice the three women who had entered behind the countess. Two were older ladies, companions or chaperones, he presumed. The third, standing slightly apart, was a young woman dressed simply in gray, her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that kept its gaze lowered. The countess followed his glance. "My ladies in waiting," she explained. "Lady Kovacs, Madame Horvath, and my personal handmaiden, Valeria Sabo." The handmaiden dipped into a curtsy, so perfect it might have been practiced at court. When she straightened, her eyes briefly met Robert's, then darted away. In that moment, he caught a glimpse of intelligence in those dark eyes, a spark that seemed at odds with her position. "They must all be exhausted from the journey," Robert said, motioning to a servant. "Please show the ladies to their quarters. We have prepared rooms in the east wing." As they were led away, the handmaiden, Valeria, followed last, carrying a small case that must have contained her mistress's personal items. She walked with a grace that belied her station, her back straight, her steps measured. "Shall we take tea in the garden room?" Robert suggested to the countess. "The afternoon light is particularly pleasant there." Over the next hours, Robert and Victoria spoke of practical matters. The wedding date, set for just 6 weeks hence, the guest list, which would include the Emperor Franz Joseph himself, the arrangements for their future household. Victoria proved herself intelligent and well-informed on politics. "The Russian situation concerns me," she remarked at one point. "Their influence in the Balkans grows stronger each year." "You follow international affairs closely," Robert observed, somewhat surprised. "My father believed daughters should be educated as thoroughly as sons," she replied with a small smile. "Though, of course, I would never presume to advise on such matters once we are married." The statement was delivered with perfect propriety, yet Robert detected something rehearsed about it. This woman had opinions, but knew better than to display them too boldly. Their tea concluded with Robert feeling cautiously optimistic. Victoria was pleasant, cultured, and would certainly fulfill her role as Countess Esterházy admirably. If there was no passion between them, well, that was hardly expected in marriages of their class. Later that evening, as Robert passed through the library on his way to dinner, he paused at the sight of a figure standing before the bookshelves. The handmaiden, Valeria, was reaching for a volume, her slender fingers tracing the spines of his collection. She startled at his entrance, withdrawing her hand as though burned. "Forgive me, Your Excellency. I did not mean to intrude." "You have an interest in books?" he asked, curious despite himself. I was merely dusting, sir. But her eyes betrayed her, glancing longingly at the shelf she had been examining. Robert stepped closer, noting the section. History of the Habsburg Empire? Curious choice for dusting. A flush crept into her cheeks. She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. My father was a professor at the University of Budapest before his death. He taught me to read from his library. A professor's daughter, Robert said softly. How came you to be a handmaiden? Pain flickered across her features. Life takes unexpected turns, Your Excellency. My father's debts left me with few options. The dinner bell rang, saving her from further explanation. You should choose a volume to borrow, Robert said impulsively. The library is open to all in this house. Her eyes widened. That would not be appropriate, sir. Knowledge should not be constrained by station, he replied, surprising himself with the sentiment. Take whichever interests you. He left her standing there, but as he walked to dinner, he found himself thinking of dark eyes that held too much intelligence for a servant's position and the curious twist of fate that had brought a professor's daughter into his household. The days that followed established a rhythm to their lives. Mornings were devoted to wedding preparations, with Robert and Victoria meeting with the steward, the priest, the decorators. Afternoons often found Victoria resting, claimed by migraines that seemed conveniently timed to provide her solitude. Robert returned to his regular duties, estate management, correspondence with Vienna, and meetings with local officials. It was during these afternoons that Robert began to notice Valeria more frequently. She moved through the house like a shadow, efficient and nearly invisible as good servants were meant to be. Yet unlike the others, she seemed to absorb everything around her. He caught her pausing before paintings, studying architectural details, or most often, lingering near bookshelves. One rainy afternoon, Robert entered the conservatory seeking solitude only to find Valeria there, carefully tending to the orchids. Do you have knowledge of botany as well? He asked, causing her to start. Only practical experience, Your Excellency, she replied, her hands continuing their gentle work with the plants. My father kept a small garden at our home in Buda. Robert moved closer, watching as she removed dead leaves with precise movements. You miss it? Your home. For a moment, her composure slipped. Every day, she admitted softly. But that life is gone now. What happened? The question was too personal, too informal, but something about her drew his curiosity. Valeria's hands stilled. My father was brilliant but unworldly. After my mother died, he withdrew into his studies, neglecting practical matters. When the fever took him 3 years ago, I discovered we had nothing. The creditors took everything, even his books. Her voice caught on the last word. And so you entered service. She nodded. The Countess's family needed an educated companion who could also serve as handmaiden. I spoke the languages she was learning, French, English, Italian. I could read to her, help with correspondence. Yet now you dust shelves and tend plants, Robert observed. We all have our place, Your Excellency, she said, her voice carefully neutral once more. The Countess has been good to me. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps ended their conversation. Valeria immediately resumed her duties, head bowed, the brief moment of openness gone. That night at dinner, Robert found himself studying his betrothed with new eyes. Victoria was everything a nobleman's wife should be, poised, elegant, knowledgeable about the social graces. Yet he wondered now about the migraines that so conveniently removed her from company, about the carefully rehearsed opinions she occasionally voiced. Your handmaiden seems unusually well-educated, he remarked casually as they took coffee in the small salon after dinner. Victoria's face showed a flicker of something, concern? Annoyance? Valeria is most capable, she said carefully. Though sometimes I fear her background makes her forget her place. Her father was a professor, I understand. Yes, she came highly recommended for her languages and literacy. Victoria set down her cup. But I trust you are not too interested in my servants, Robert. The gentle rebuke was clear. A nobleman did not concern himself with handmaidens, however intriguing their circumstances. Merely an observation, he said smoothly. I value education, even among staff. Victoria studied him for a moment. You are not what I expected, Count Esterházy. How so? You have a reputation in Vienna as rather conventional. Yet here I find a man who notices servants and values learning in unusual places. Robert was surprised by her perception. Perhaps neither of us is quite what the other expected. A small smile curved her lips. Perhaps that is not entirely a bad thing. In the weeks that followed, Robert found himself increasingly drawn to the mystery of Valeria Sabo. He observed her reading in the garden at dawn before her duties began. He noticed how she listened attentively to political discussions at dinner while serving, her face carefully blank but her eyes alert. Once, passing the music room, he heard the piano played with unexpected skill, only to enter and find Valeria rising hastily from the bench. "Forgive me," she said immediately. "The Countess asked me to check if the instrument was properly tuned before her practice tomorrow." "You play beautifully," he said simply. "My mother taught me." Before. She didn't finish the sentence. Before life took its unexpected turn, he completed for her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits trapped by circumstance. Then she dipped into a curtsy and slipped from the room, leaving only the lingering notes of Chopin in her wake. That same evening, a letter arrived from Vienna. The emperor's attendance at the wedding was confirmed, along with a delegation from the Hungarian parliament. What had been planned as a relatively modest ceremony was transforming into a political event of significance. "This changes matters," Robert told Victoria as they reviewed the correspondence in his study. "The marriage now carries even greater implications for both our families." "Yes," she agreed, her face composed but her fingers fidgeting with her bracelet. "My father will be pleased." Robert noticed her discomfort. "Does this prospect disturb you, Countess?" She hesitated. "May I speak frankly, Robert? Please. I have always known my marriage would serve political purposes. I was raised to fulfill this role." She paused. "But I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that there might also be compatibility between us." Her vulnerability touched him. "I believe we are compatible in many ways, Victoria. We share interests, background, understanding of our responsibilities. But not passion," she said quietly, then blushed at her own boldness. Robert was taken aback by her directness. "Passion often fades. Respect and shared purpose endure." She nodded, composing herself. "Of course, you are right." As she rose to leave, her handmaiden appeared at the door, as silent and watchful as ever. For an instant, Robert caught Valeria's gaze, and the intensity he found there unsettled him deeply. She knew, somehow, the nature of their conversation, and there was something in her eyes, not judgment, but a deep, quiet understanding that made him feel suddenly exposed. After they departed, Robert poured himself a brandy and stood at the window, watching the gardens being silvered by moonlight. He was doing precisely what was expected of him, making an advantageous match, securing his family's position, behaving as a man of his station should. Yet increasingly, he felt like an actor playing a role rather than a man living his life. His thoughts kept returning to Valeria, to her quiet dignity, her hidden talents, the spark of life in her eyes that no amount of servitude had extinguished. She was the most genuine person in his household, perhaps because she had nothing left to lose. The following day brought a rare opportunity. Victoria and her companions departed for Vienna to select final items for her trousseau, leaving Valeria behind to organize the Countess's rooms. Robert, claiming estate business, remained at the palace as well. That afternoon, he found Valeria in the library, carefully cataloging books that had been displaced during recent cleaning. She wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back, but with a few tendrils escaping around her face. Without the presence of others, she moved more naturally, humming softly to herself as she worked. "I did not know my library required reorganization," he said, causing her to whirl in surprise. "Your Excellency, I thought you had gone riding." She clutched a volume to her chest like a shield. "The Countess asked me to ensure her favorite volumes were easily accessible after the wedding." "And what have you discovered about my collection?" he asked, moving closer. She hesitated, then answered with unexpected honesty, that it was assembled for show rather than use. "The classics are pristine, the political treatises unopened. Only the military histories show signs of reading." Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Most of the library had been inherited, maintained as a nobleman was expected to maintain a library, but rarely used. "And what would you read, if this were your collection?" he asked. The question seemed to startle her. Then, setting aside caution, she moved to the shelves. "These," she said, touching a set of volumes on natural philosophy, "and these on the history of music. The poetry, especially the modern verses from England." Her fingers trailed along the spines lovingly. "But most of all, these accounts of travel to distant lands." "You wish to travel?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I never shall. But books allow journeys even for those who cannot leave their circumstances." The simple truth of her statement moved him. "I have traveled extensively," he said. "Yet I find myself wondering if I truly saw anything beyond what I was expected to see." "How can one see with others' eyes?" she asked. "By living according to others' expectations," he answered. "By following paths determined by birth rather than inclination." Their conversation had moved beyond the bounds of propriety, yet neither seemed able to retreat to safer ground. "And what would you do, Your Excellency, if you followed your own inclinations?" Valeria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between them, dangerous in its implications. Robert found himself unable to look away from her face, from eyes that held both challenge and understanding. "I would," he began, but was interrupted by the butler announcing an unexpected visitor from Vienna. Valeria immediately stepped back, resuming her role as servant. The spell broken, Robert straightened his jacket and moved toward the door, but not before saying quietly, "We shall continue this conversation another time." The interruption proved significant. A messenger from the emperor himself, bringing news that shifted the political landscape. Tensions with Russia had escalated, and the emperor now viewed Robert's marriage as an opportunity to display unity between the Austrian and Hungarian nobility. The wedding date would need to be moved forward. When Victoria returned that evening and learned of these developments, she accepted them with characteristic grace. "If His Imperial Majesty wishes it, we shall be married in 2 weeks rather than 4. But later, as Robert walked through the garden taking evening air, he came upon Victoria and Valeria in quiet conversation on a secluded bench. He paused, concealed by shrubbery, his presence unknown to them. "It is happening too quickly," Victoria was saying, her composure finally cracking. "I am not prepared." "You have been preparing your entire life, my lady," Valeria replied gently. "You will be a magnificent countess." "But will I ever know happiness, Valeria? Real happiness, not just duty fulfilled." Valeria took her mistress's hand. "Happiness comes in many forms. You will have position, security, respect." "But not love," Victoria whispered. "He does not love me, nor I him." "Few of your station marry for love," Valeria reminded her. "Perhaps affection will grow." Victoria looked at her handmaiden with sudden intensity. "And you? Will you ever know love, trapped in service to me?" Valeria's face revealed nothing, but Robert noticed her hands tighten in her lap. "My place is by your side, my lady. That is enough." "It shouldn't be," Victoria said fiercely. "You deserve more, Valeria. So much more than fate has given you." Robert retreated silently, troubled by what he had overheard. The conversation revealed dimensions to both women he had not fully appreciated. Victoria's deeper feelings beneath her perfect composure, and the complex bond between mistress and handmaiden that seemed to transcend their respective stations. That night, Robert found sleep elusive. He stood at his bedroom window, watching the gardens silvered by moonlight, and caught sight of a solitary figure walking the paths. Valeria, wrapped in a shawl against the spring chill, moved through the formal gardens with measured steps, finally settling on a stone bench beside the small, ornamental lake. Without fully considering his actions, Robert pulled on a dressing gown and made his way downstairs and out into the gardens. The night air was cool, fragrant with early blossoms. His approach was not silent. Valeria turned at the sound of his footsteps on the gravel path. "Your Excellency," she said, rising quickly. "I apologize for being out at this hour." "Please," he said, gesturing for her to remain seated. "The gardens are open to all who need solitude." After a moment's hesitation, she sat again, though perched at the edge of the bench as if ready to flee. Robert took a place beside her, leaving proper distance between them. "You could not sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts." "About the changed wedding date?" Her eyes, reflecting the moonlight, studied him carefully. "About many things, sir." They sat in silence for a moment. The only sounds the gentle splash of water in the fountain and the distant call of a nightingale. I overheard you with the Countess earlier, Robert finally admitted. Not intentionally. Valeria stiffened. Sir, I would never speak ill of you didn't, he assured her. You were loyal and kind. But I heard her concerns, and yours. I have no concerns beyond serving my mistress, she said carefully. Don't you? He asked softly. A woman of your intelligence and education, bound to service with no hope of advancement or change. She turned to face him fully now. What would you have me say, Your Excellency? That I dream of a different life? That I read your books and imagine myself free to pursue knowledge, to travel, to... She stopped abruptly. To love, he finished for her. The word hung between them, dangerous and electric. Valeria looked away, her profile etched against the night sky. Such thoughts are useless, she finally said. We live in the world as it is, not as we might wish it to be. Must we? Robert asked. Are we truly so bound by circumstance that we cannot shape our own destinies at all? She gave a soft, bitter laugh. You ask this? You, a count of the empire, born to privilege and position? What do you know of being truly bound? Different chains, he said quietly. Golden ones, perhaps, but chains nonetheless. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. Something passed between them, recognition, understanding, a dangerous kinship. We should not be having this conversation, Valeria said, though she made no move to leave. No, he agreed. We should not. Yet they remained, talking as the moon tracked across the sky. Valeria spoke of her childhood in Buda, of her father's library where she had first discovered the wider world through books. Robert shared memories of his own father, stern and unyielding, who had mapped out his son's life without once asking what the boy might want for himself. I wanted to study architecture, he confessed. To build, to create. But Esterházys are soldiers and statesmen, not artists. Yet you designed the East Garden, she observed. The groundskeeper mentioned it was your design entirely. He was surprised she knew this. A small indulgence. Something that could be justified as befitting my station. It is beautiful, she said simply. There is mathematics in the proportions, but also poetry in the arrangement. No one had ever seen his garden so clearly, understood what he had tried to achieve with it. The night grew colder, and Valeria shivered slightly. Without thinking, Robert removed his dressing gown and placed it around her shoulders. You'll be cold, she protested. I'm accustomed to military campaigns. This is nothing. She pulled the garment closer, surrounded by his warmth, his scent. Thank you. The intimacy of the gesture, of sharing his clothing, suddenly made both aware of how far beyond propriety they had ventured. Valeria stood abruptly. I should return. The Countess rises early. Robert nodded, also standing. Of course. She began to remove his dressing gown, but he stopped her with a gentle hand. Keep it until you reach the house. The night is cold. Their fingers brushed, a momentary contact that sent awareness coursing through them both. Valeria stepped back quickly. Good night, Your Excellency. Robert, he said impulsively. When we are alone, could you not call me Robert? She looked at him with an expression of mingled longing and regret. That would be unwise. Robert. His name on her lips felt like a gift, a secret shared. Good night, Valeria. She turned and walked swiftly back toward the house, his dressing gown wrapped around her slender form, while Robert remained by the lake, watching until she disappeared from sight. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The palace was transformed for the imperial visit and wedding, with fresh paint, new draperies, and flowers arriving daily from the hothouses. Additional staff were brought in from Vienna. Amid the chaos, Robert found few opportunities to speak with either Victoria or Valeria alone, yet he observed them both with new awareness. Victoria, he noticed, showed genuine kindness to servants and visiting tradespeople. She managed the household arrangements with quiet efficiency, never raising her voice even when things went awry. She would make an excellent countess, respected if not beloved. And Valeria, she remained the shadow at Victoria's side, anticipating needs, smoothing difficulties, always watchful. But now Robert caught the small moments of humanity beneath her servant's mask, a wry smile at some absurd demand from a Viennese decorator, a gentle hand steadying an elderly gardener on the stairs, the way she hummed softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. 5 days before the wedding, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the East Wing, starting in the newly installed draperies and spreading rapidly. The household was thrown into panic, servants rushing with buckets of water as smoke filled the corridors. Robert was in his study when the alarm was raised. He rushed to the East Wing to find chaos, maids screaming, footmen attempting to douse the flames that were rapidly consuming the guest quarters. Through the smoke, he heard Victoria's voice calling for Valeria. "She went back for your mother's portrait, my lady," a maid was saying. "Through there." Without hesitation, Robert pushed past the servants into the smoke-filled corridor. The heat was intense, the air nearly unbreathable. He pulled his jacket over his face and pressed forward, calling Valeria's name. He found her in Victoria's sitting room, struggling to free a large portrait from the wall as flames licked at the adjoining room. She was coughing violently, her face streaked with soot. "Valeria!" he shouted above the roar of the fire. "Leave it. We must go." She turned, her eyes widening at the sight of him. "The portrait, it's all she has of her mother. It's not worth your life," he insisted, reaching for her arm. As he did, there was an ominous crack above them. Robert looked up to see a burning beam starting to give way. In one fluid motion, he pulled Valeria against him and rolled them both clear as the beam crashed down where she had been standing. They landed hard, Robert taking the brunt of the impact, Valeria protected in his arms. For one suspended moment, they lay tangled together, faces inches apart, hearts pounding in shared terror, and something else, something neither dared name. "Are you hurt?" he asked hoarsely. She shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "You came for me." "Of course I came," he said simply. More shouts from the corridor broke the moment. Robert helped Valeria to her feet, and together they stumbled toward the exit, leaving the portrait to the flames. Outside, Victoria rushed to them, her face white with fear. "Valeria? Oh, thank God." She embraced her handmaiden fiercely, then turned to Robert. "And you? You risked yourself to save her." "As would any decent man," he said, though all three knew it was more than decency that had driven him. The fire was contained before it could spread to the main part of the palace, but the East Wing was severely damaged. The wedding would have to be postponed. There was no way to accommodate the imperial party and distinguished guests with half the palace uninhabitable. That evening, as the household settled into makeshift arrangements, the doctor who had been summoned to treat minor injuries insisted on examining Robert and Valeria for smoke effects. Robert was declared merely smoke-affected, but Valeria's lungs had suffered more. The doctor prescribed bed rest for at least 3 days. "She can recover in my chambers," Victoria declared. "I'll sleep in the adjoining room." "No, my lady," Valeria protested weakly. "I can return to my duties." "You most certainly cannot," the doctor interrupted. "Your lungs need time to heal, young woman. Complete rest." Robert found himself visiting the sick room the following afternoon, ostensibly to check on the patient, but in truth drawn by a need to see her, to assure himself of her recovery. He brought a book, one of the travel accounts she had admired in his library. Victoria was seated beside the bed, reading correspondence, while Valeria lay propped against pillows, her face pale, but her eyes clear. "Count Esterházy." Victoria greeted him, rising. "How kind of you to visit." "I came to see how our patient fares," he said, trying to keep his gaze from lingering too obviously on Valeria. "Better, thanks to your bravery," Victoria said. "I was just telling Valeria that I've written to my father about your heroism." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "It was nothing extraordinary." "It was to me," Valeria said softly, her voice still raspy from the smoke. Their eyes met, and Robert felt that same connection that had grown between them, something profound and dangerous. Victoria looked between them, her expression unreadable. "I have some matters to attend to," she said suddenly. "Perhaps, Robert, you might keep Valeria company for a short while?" The doctor said conversation would do her good, so long as she doesn't strain her voice. Before either could object, Victoria had gathered her papers and departed, leaving them alone. An awkward silence fell. "I brought you this," Robert finally said, offering the book. "Since you cannot visit the library." Valeria took it, her fingers brushing his. "Travels in the Orient," she read. "Thank you. I thought you might enjoy journeying in your mind, at least until you're well enough to move about again." She smiled, the expression transforming her face. You remembered. I remember everything about our conversations, he admitted. Another silence, heavier with meaning. The wedding will be delayed, she said finally. Yes, at least 3 weeks, possibly longer. Valeria studied his face. Are you disappointed? No, he answered honestly. I find myself conflicted. Because of your duty to your family? Because of my growing understanding that duty without happiness is a hollow thing. She looked down at the book in her hands. And what would make you happy, Robert? The question hung between them, fraught with implications neither could safely explore. Time, he said finally. Time to know my own mind before I commit my life to a path that cannot be altered. And the Countess? What of her happiness? Robert sighed. I wonder if she truly wishes this marriage any more than I do. She speaks of duty, of fulfilling expectations, but never of desire or joy. Perhaps she too needs time, Valeria suggested, to know her own mind. Their conversation was interrupted by a servant bringing Valeria's medicine. Robert rose to leave, but paused at the bedside. I am glad you are recovering, he said formally, aware of the servant's presence. Then, more quietly, I could not bear it if you had been seriously harmed. The days that followed brought new complications. Word arrived from Vienna that the emperor was displeased by the delay, but would accommodate the revised schedule. More pressing was the arrival of Victoria's father, Count Cellini, a stern Hungarian nobleman who viewed the marriage as the culmination of years of political maneuvering. This fire is most inconvenient, he declared upon inspection of the damage. But perhaps we can proceed with a smaller ceremony elsewhere on the estate. The emperor expects grandeur befitting the occasion, Robert replied carefully. And the Countess Victoria deserves no less than perfection for her wedding day. Count Cellini fixed him with a shrewd gaze. Indeed, my daughter's happiness is, of course, my primary concern. Something in his tone suggested otherwise. This was a man who saw marriage as a strategic alliance, nothing more. That evening, Robert overheard an argument between Victoria and her father in the small salon. He had not meant to eavesdrop, but their raised voices carried through the partially open door as he passed. You will do your duty, Victoria, Count Cellini was saying. The alliance with the Esterházys is crucial to our family's position in Budapest. I understand duty, father, Victoria replied, her voice tight, with suppressed emotion. I have never opposed this match. Yet you suggest postponing further? Unacceptable. There are already whispers in Vienna about the delay. The palace needs repairs. Excuses. I see how the Count looks at that handmaiden of yours. Do you think I am blind? There was a sharp intake of breath. Valeria has nothing to do with this. Doesn't she? A convenient fire, a necessary postponement, and suddenly the girl who should be invisible is the focus of your betrothed's attention. You go too far, Victoria said, her voice suddenly cold. Valeria nearly died saving my mother's portrait. If Robert showed her kindness afterward, it was merely decent. See that it remains merely decent, Count Cellini warned. The wedding will proceed as soon as repairs permit. I suggest you keep your handmaiden out of the Count's sight until then. Robert moved away, disturbed by what he had heard. Count Cellini had seen what Robert himself had been unwilling to fully acknowledge, that his feelings for Valeria had grown beyond propriety or reason. The following morning, Valeria was nowhere to be seen. When Robert inquired casually about her absence, Victoria explained that she had sent her handmaiden to their country estate to oversee the packing of additional belongings needed after the fire. When will she return? He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Victoria studied him thoughtfully. That depends on several factors. My father believes we should simplify the household until after the wedding. The implication was clear. Valeria had been deliberately removed from his presence. I see, Robert said stiffly. And do you share your father's belief? Instead of answering directly, Victoria set aside her teacup and looked at him with unexpected directness. Walk with me in the garden, Robert. I think it's time we spoke honestly with one another. Surprised, he offered his arm, and they made their way to the west garden, which had been untouched by the fire. It was a perfect spring day, the air fragrant with blooming roses and freshly cut grass. When they reached a secluded bench, Victoria spoke. You have feelings for Valeria. It was not a question. Robert considered denying it, but the time for pretense seemed past. I admire her greatly, he said carefully. You more than admire her, Victoria countered. I have seen how you look at her, how you seek her out, how your face changes when she enters a room. Robert felt a flush of shame. Victoria, I have never dishonored our engagement. I would never, I know, she interrupted. You are too honorable a man to act on such feelings. But they exist nonetheless. He couldn't deny it. I apologize if I have caused you pain. To his surprise, Victoria gave a small, sad smile. Do you know why I agreed to this marriage, Robert? For the same reasons I did. Family obligation, social expectation. Yes, but also because among all the men my father considered, you seemed the kindest. I thought we might build a partnership based on mutual respect, if not love. We still can, Robert said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Victoria shook her head. Not while your heart belongs elsewhere, and not while mine does as well. This last statement caught him by surprise. You care for someone else? A flush colored her cheeks. There is a man, a diplomat in the Hungarian delegation to Vienna. We met at court last winter. He is of good family, but not sufficient rank for my father's ambitions. You love him? Robert asked gently. I believe I could, she admitted, given the chance to know him better. They sat in silence, the revelation hanging between them. Finally, Robert spoke. What would you have us do, Victoria? Our families expect this marriage. The emperor himself has approved it. The political implications are significant. I know, she sighed, which is why I sent Valeria away, not to keep her from you, but to give us both time to think clearly, to consider what can and cannot be changed. And your father? He suspects my reluctance, but attributes it to maidenly nerves. She gave a rueful smile. He would never imagine I might have my own desires. Robert took her hand impulsively. You deserve happiness, Victoria. Real happiness, not just duty fulfilled. She looked startled at hearing her own words to Valeria repeated back to her. As do you, Robert. As does Valeria. A complicated equation with no obvious solution, he observed. Perhaps, Victoria agreed. But I believe people of intelligence and goodwill can find paths forward even in difficult circumstances. As they walked back to the house, Robert felt a new bond forming with his betrothed, not the romantic connection that had been expected, but something potentially more valuable, honest friendship and mutual understanding. The days passed slowly. Repairs to the East Wing progressed, and plans for the delayed wedding resumed. Count Cellini remained at the estate, his presence a constant reminder of the expectations weighing on both Robert and Victoria. Valeria did not return. Robert found himself looking for her at every turn. In the library, in the gardens, in the quiet corners of the palace where they had shared conversations. Her absence was a physical ache, and he finally understood the depth of his feelings. This was no passing infatuation or forbidden attraction. He had fallen in love with her mind, her spirit, her quiet strength. One evening, unable to sleep, Robert returned to the bench by the lake where they had talked through the night. The moon was nearly full again, silvering the water just as it had done when they sat together. I thought I might find you here, came Victoria's voice from behind him. He turned, surprised. I couldn't sleep. Nor I. She joined him on the bench, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the night air. I received a letter from Valeria today. Robert's heart quickened. Is she well? Yes. She asks permission to remain at the country house until after the wedding. Victoria's eyes were sad in the moonlight. She believes it best for everyone. She's wrong, Robert said before he could stop himself. Victoria studied him. What would you have her do? Return here to watch you marry another woman? To continue serving in silence while her heart breaks? The blunt assessment left him speechless. She loves you too. You know, Victoria continued softly. She would never say it, never act on it. But I know her too well to be deceived. How can you speak of this so calmly? Robert asked. Most women would be furious to discover their betrothed's affections lay elsewhere. Perhaps because my own heart is similarly compromised, she admitted. Or perhaps because I care for Valeria as a sister, and I have seen how she has suffered in silence. They sat quietly for a moment, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I've been thinking, Victoria finally said, about possible paths forward. And there is one option we haven't considered. It would require courage and would create scandal, but might ultimately lead to happiness for all concerned. I'm listening, Robert said. We could end our engagement. The words hung in the night air, both terrifying and liberating. Your father would never permit it, Robert said. nor would mine. The political implications alone would be significant but not insurmountable, she finished. Robert, we are not pawns, though we've been treated as such. We are adults with the right to determine our own futures. The Emperor himself has blessed this union. Then we shall have to find a way to make him unbless it, Victoria said with unexpected determination. Or to make him see that a different arrangement might better serve his interests. What arrangement? Robert asked, intrigued despite his doubts. I need time to work through the details. But I believe there may be a diplomatic solution that satisfies the political necessities while allowing personal happiness. As they returned to the house, Robert felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. If Victoria, raised to be the perfect nobleman's wife, could envision a different future, perhaps it was not entirely impossible. The following days brought new developments. The Hungarian diplomat Victoria had mentioned, Istvan Kovacs, arrived at the estate as part of the advance party preparing for the wedding. He was a handsome man in his early 30s, with intelligent eyes and a reserved manner. Robert observed the careful way he and Victoria interacted in public, perfectly proper, yet charged with unspoken feeling. Count Cellini watched these interactions with growing suspicion. His displeasure manifested in increasingly controlling behavior toward his daughter, dictating her schedule and limiting her movements about the estate. Meanwhile, Robert threw himself into estate business, riding out each day to inspect farms and meet with tenants. Physical activity and distance from the house helped clear his mind. He found himself considering options he would never have contemplated before, resigning his court position, traveling abroad, even renouncing his title if necessary. The thought of a life without Valeria had become unendurable. 10 days before the rescheduled wedding, Robert received an unexpected visitor. A carriage bearing imperial insignia arrived without announcement, and from it emerged Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the emperor's nephew and heir presumptive to the throne. Your Imperial Highness, Robert greeted him with appropriate deference. We had no word of your visit. A deliberate omission, the Archduke replied with a thin smile. I find people show their true natures when not prepared for imperial scrutiny. The Archduke was known for his strong opinions and willingness to challenge convention. His own marriage to Sophie Chotek, a woman of noble but insufficient rank for an imperial bride, had caused tremendous controversy years earlier. Over dinner, Franz Ferdinand observed the interactions between Robert, Victoria, and the Hungarian diplomat with shrewd eyes. Count Cellini, clearly unsettled by the Archduke's unexpected presence, attempted to dominate the conversation with political observations. The alliance between Austrian and Hungarian nobility has never been more important, he declared at one point, which is why this marriage is of such significance. Marriages of state have their place, the Archduke commented, though I myself found greater value in a union based on mutual affection. Count Cellini shifted uncomfortably, aware of the Archduke's controversial marriage. Your Imperial Highness's situation was unique. Every human heart is unique, Count Cellini, Franz Ferdinand replied. Something politicians too often forget. After dinner, the Archduke requested a private word with Robert in the study. Once they were alone, his formal manner relaxed slightly. The Emperor sent me to assess the situation here, he explained. There are concerns about the repeated delays. The fire was unfortunate, but very real, Robert assured him. Yes, I've seen the damage. The Archduke paced the room, examining objects on the shelves. But there are whispers of other complications. Reluctance on both sides. Divided affections. Robert felt a chill. Court gossip had evidently reached imperial ears. Sir, Franz Ferdinand raised a hand. I am perhaps the last person who should judge matters of the heart, Count Esterházy. My own marriage nearly cost me the succession. Yet you proceeded nonetheless, Robert observed. Because I could not imagine life without Sophie, regardless of consequence. The Archduke turned to face him directly. The question is whether your situation warrants similar conviction. My situation is complex, Robert admitted carefully. Involving a certain handmaiden, I understand. At Robert's startled look, he added, the Emperor has excellent sources of information. Nothing at court remains secret for long. Then you know how impossible. Franz Ferdinand interrupted. I married a woman deemed entirely unsuitable for my position. The Emperor himself opposed it vehemently. Yet here I stand, still heir to the throne, with my wife now recognized as Duchess of Hohenberg. Your circumstances are different. You are imperial blood, and you are merely a count?" The Archduke gave a short laugh. "The Esterházys have been kingmakers in Hungary for centuries. Your family's influence is considerable. Not enough to defy convention so completely," Robert said. Franz Ferdinand studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you underestimate what might be possible with the right approach." He moved toward the door. "I shall remain for 3 days. By then, I expect clarity on whether this wedding will proceed as planned. The Emperor requires certainty." After the Archduke retired for the evening, Robert sought out Victoria, finding her in the small salon with Istvan Kovacs. They sprang apart at his entrance, though they had been doing nothing improper. "Robert," Victoria said, composing herself. "Did the Archduke speak of the wedding?" "He knows everything," Robert replied grimly. "About all of us." Istvan paled. "My position at court may be at risk," Robert acknowledged. "As much else. He requires an answer in 3 days about whether the wedding will proceed." Victoria sank onto a chair. "Then we must decide." "There is no decision to make," Istvan said bitterly. "The political necessities are clear. You must marry as arranged." "Must I?" Victoria looked between the two men. The Archduke himself defied convention for love. His presence here may be more opportunity than threat. "What are you suggesting?" Robert asked. "That we speak truth to power," she said simply. "All of us." The following morning brought another surprise. As Robert met with his steward in the library, a servant announced the arrival of a carriage from the Cellini country estate. His heart leapt, then sank again as Count Cellini entered rather than Valeria. "Esterházy." The Count greeted him curtly. "We have matters to discuss." The steward was dismissed, leaving them alone. "I've received disturbing reports from my staff." Count Cellini began without preamble. "It seems my daughter's handmaiden has been receiving correspondence from this house." Robert kept his expression neutral. "I was unaware of any correspondence." "Don't play the fool," Cellini snapped. "Letters in your hand, delivered by your groom. Did you think my people wouldn't notice?" This was unexpected. Robert had sent no letters to Valeria, knowing such communication would be improper and likely intercepted. "You are mistaken," he said firmly. "I have not written to Miss Sabo." Count Cellini's eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps my daughter has been less honest than I thought. No matter. I've brought the girl back with me." Robert's heart stopped. "Valeria is here?" "In the carriage, awaiting my instructions." Cellini's mouth curved in a cold smile. "I thought it best to keep potential complications under control with the Archduke in residence." "She is not a complication to be controlled," Robert said, anger rising. "She is a human being deserving of dignity and respect." "She is a servant who has forgotten her place," Cellini countered. "And you, Count, have forgotten yours if you speak of her in such terms." Before Robert could respond, the door opened and Victoria entered, her face tight with strain. "Father, I was told you had arrived." She glanced between the two men, sensing the tension. "Is something wrong?" "I've brought your handmaiden back from the country," Cellini informed her. "Since the wedding approaches, and you'll need her services." Victoria paled slightly. "I see. Where is she now?" "Waiting in the carriage like a good servant," Cellini said pointedly. "Perhaps you should go welcome her while I continue my discussion with your betrothed." Victoria hesitated, then nodded and withdrew. Once she was gone, Cellini turned back to Robert. "Let me be perfectly clear, Count Esterházy. This marriage will proceed as planned. The Emperor expects it, our families require it, and neither a servant girl nor my daughter's romantic fancies will interfere." "And if I refuse?" Robert asked quietly. Cellini's face hardened. "Then you will find your position at court untenable. Your estates in Hungary would face interesting tax complications. And as for the girl," he shrugged. "Servants can be difficult to place when they lack references." The threat was clear. Robert felt cold fury rising within him, but maintained his composure. "You speak of people's lives as though they were chess pieces, Count Cellini. In the game of power, that is precisely what they are," Cellini replied. "Remember your position, Count. Remember what your family expects of you." After Cellini departed, Robert remained in the library, his mind racing. The Count's threats were not idle. He had the connections and influence to cause significant harm. Yet the thought of proceeding with the wedding, of living a lie while Valeria remained within reach, but forever untouchable, was unbearable. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. The door opened to reveal Victoria, her face drawn with worry. "Robert, I must speak with you. Something unexpected has happened." "Valeria's return?" "No. Or rather, yes, but there's more." She closed the door behind her, ensuring their privacy. "The letters my father mentioned, they were not from you. They were from me." Robert stared at her in confusion. "You wrote to Valeria?" "Of course. She is my friend as well as my handmaiden." Victoria twisted her hands nervously. "But in my letters, I may have conveyed certain sentiments that could be misinterpreted." "What sentiments?" I told her of our conversations, of our mutual understanding about affections that lie elsewhere. Victoria met his eyes directly. "I told her that I believed we might find a way forward that would bring happiness to all." "And did you mention the Archduke's arrival?" "Yes. I suggested his presence might be providential, given his own history." Victoria sighed. "My father must have intercepted my last letter. It's why he brought Valeria back, to control the situation. Or to use her as leverage," Robert said grimly. "What will we do?" Victoria asked, genuine fear in her voice. "My father is capable of great cruelty when his ambitions are threatened." Robert considered their options. The Archduke's presence complicated matters, but might also provide an opportunity. Franz Ferdinand had defied convention for love. He might be sympathetic to their situation. "We need to speak with the Archduke," he decided. "Honestly and directly. But first, I must see Valeria." Finding her proved difficult. Count Cellini had installed Valeria in the servants' quarters of the undamaged West Wing, with instructions that she was to remain there except when specifically required by the Countess. It was evening before Robert managed to locate her. He found her in the small garden adjacent to the servants' entrance, sitting alone on a stone bench. She rose immediately at his approach, curtsying deeply. "Your Excellency." "Valeria." Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. "Are you well? Has Count Cellini treated you properly?" "I am unharmed," she said carefully, her eyes darting around as though expecting to be observed. "Though my return was unexpected, it was not my doing," he assured her. "I would never have brought you back to witness." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Your wedding," she completed softly. "I understand, sir. It is my duty to serve the Countess on such an important occasion." "Valeria, please." Robert stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No servants or guards are present. We can speak freely." She raised her eyes to his, and the pain he saw there cut him to the core. "What purpose would that serve?" "To speak of things that cannot be. Things that perhaps can be," he countered. "Victoria has told me of her letters to you." A flush crept into Valeria's cheeks. The Countess is kind but idealistic. She imagines happy endings where none are possible. "The Archduke is here," Robert said. "The same Archduke who defied the Emperor to marry for love. He is imperial blood. You are a count. I am nothing." Valeria's voice was resigned. "The distance between us cannot be bridged, Robert." It was the first time she had used his name without prompting, and it gave him hope. "I disagree. With courage and the right allies, perhaps we can find a path forward." She studied his face, searching for certainty. "And if we cannot? If your position, your family's standing, your very future is destroyed in the attempt, then I will have failed fighting for something that matters, rather than succeeded at something hollow." Valeria's expression softened, a glimmer of hope entering her eyes. "What would you have me do?" "Be ready," he said. "Tomorrow, the Archduke has requested a tour of the estate. Victoria has arranged for you to accompany us, ostensibly to assist with refreshments. It will give him an opportunity to observe us all together." "A dangerous gamble," she murmured. "Yes," he agreed, "but perhaps our only chance." As twilight deepened around them, Robert longed to take her hand, to pull her into his arms. Instead, he maintained a proper distance, aware of the risks they already took. "Until tomorrow, then," Valeria said, dipping into a curtsy that now seemed like a relic of a world they both hoped to leave behind. "Until tomorrow," he echoed, hoping with all his heart it would mark the beginning of a different future. The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the planned tour of the estate. The Archduke, dressed informally by his standards, joined Robert, Victoria, and Istvan Kovacs in the courtyard. Count Cellini had been delayed by urgent correspondence, a transparent excuse to avoid the Archduke's uncomfortable scrutiny. As arranged, Valeria was present with 2 other servants, carrying a basket of refreshments for the excursion. She kept her eyes lowered, the perfect picture of a dutiful handmaiden, but Robert noticed the Archduke studying her with interest. "A pleasant day for a ride," Franz Ferdinand observed as they mounted their horses. "The Esterházy lands are said to be among the most beautiful in the empire." "You honor us with your interest, your Imperial Highness," Robert replied. They rode first to the vineyards, where the spring growth was well established, promising a good harvest in the autumn. The Archduke engaged the vineyard manager in detailed questions about cultivation techniques, displaying unexpected knowledge of viticulture. As they continued to the ornamental gardens Robert had designed, Victoria maneuvered her horse alongside Valeria, who rode a docile mare provided for her use. Their quiet conversation was inaudible to the others, but Robert noticed the Archduke observing this interaction with keen interest. When they stopped for refreshments beside a small stream, the dynamics of their unusual party became more evident. Valeria, though ostensibly there to serve, moved with a natural grace that belied her position. The Archduke, after accepting wine from her hands, engaged her directly. "You are the Countess's handmaiden, I understand." "Yes, your Imperial Highness," Valeria replied, curtsying deeply. "And before that, your accent suggests education." She hesitated, glancing at Victoria, who nodded encouragement. "My father was Professor Sabo of the University of Budapest. I was fortunate to receive instruction from him before his passing." "Ah, Sabo the historian?" The Archduke looked genuinely interested. "I read his monograph on the Hungarian nobility. Fascinating work." Valeria's eyes widened in surprise. "You are familiar with my father's writings?" "I make it my business to understand the complexities of the empire," Franz Ferdinand replied, "including its intellectual foundations." He glanced between Valeria and Robert, then to Victoria and Istvan. Complexity seems to be a theme of this visit. The implication was clear. He understood the undercurrents running through their party. The remainder of the tour proceeded with increasing informality, the Archduke gradually drawing out each member of the party in conversation. By the time they returned to the palace, a tacit understanding seemed to have developed. That evening, Count Cellini insisted on a formal dinner to honor the imperial visitor. Unable to refuse, the Archduke agreed but made an unusual request, that Valeria attend not as a servant but as a guest. "I found her insights on Hungarian history most illuminating," he explained when Cellini objected, "and I wish to continue our discussion in a more comfortable setting." "But your Imperial Highness, she is merely a handmaiden," Cellini protested. "It would be most irregular. Irregularity often yields the most interesting results." "Count," Franz Ferdinand interrupted, "I insist." And so Valeria found herself seated at the grand dining table, wearing one of Victoria's simpler evening gowns hastily altered to fit her slighter frame. She looked both beautiful and terrified, acutely aware of the breach in protocol her presence represented. Count Cellini barely concealed his displeasure throughout the meal, watching with narrowed eyes as the Archduke engaged Valeria in conversation about her father's academic work and her own education. Robert, seated opposite, felt a surge of pride at her composure and intelligence as she navigated this unprecedented situation. After dinner, when the gentlemen would normally have withdrawn for brandy and cigars, the Archduke again broke with tradition by suggesting they all remain together in the salon. "I find mixed company far more stimulating for conversation," he declared, effectively silencing Count Cellini's objections. Once they were settled with after-dinner drinks, Franz Ferdinand addressed the group directly. "I came here at the Emperor's request to determine whether this wedding should proceed as planned," he began without preamble. "Having observed the situation, I feel compelled to speak frankly." Count Cellini straightened, anticipating imperial support for his position. "Your Imperial Highness, we are most grateful for your interest in this alliance between our families. It is not the alliance that concerns me, Count, but rather the happiness of those involved." The Archduke's gaze moved between Robert and Victoria. "Marriage is a serious undertaking, not merely a political arrangement. As someone who faced considerable opposition to my own match, I perhaps view these matters differently than some at court." "Your Imperial Highness's situation was unique," Cellini began. "All matters of the heart are unique, Count," Franz Ferdinand interrupted. and I see before me a situation that requires careful consideration. The Countess Victoria clearly holds diplomat Kovacs in high regard, while Count Esterházy's attention seems drawn elsewhere. His eyes moved briefly to Valeria, who blushed deeply. These are mere fancies, Cellini insisted. Youthful distractions that will fade once proper marriages are established. Perhaps, the Archduke conceded. Or perhaps they are indications that different arrangements might better serve all concerned, including the Empire. Robert seized the opening. Your Imperial Highness, may I speak freely? I encourage it. The alliance between our families is important, politically and socially. But might that alliance take different forms than the one currently contemplated? Franz Ferdinand leaned forward, interested. What form do you propose? Robert glanced at Victoria, who nodded slightly. Diplomat Kovacs represents Hungarian interests at court with distinction. His family, while not of the highest nobility, has served the empire faithfully for generations. A marriage between him and Countess Cellini would still unite important elements of Austrian and Hungarian society. Count Cellini's face darkened with anger. This is outrageous. Kovacs lacks the rank, the lands. The emperor can grant titles where merit warrants, the Archduke interrupted. And lands can be part of marriage settlements. He turned to Robert. And what of your own situation, Count Esterházy? Would you abandon your duty to your family entirely? Robert took a deep breath. My duty is to ensure the Esterházy name continues to serve the empire with honor. I believe I can fulfill that duty while following my heart, if given the opportunity. All eyes turned to Valeria, who sat perfectly still, her face pale but composed. And you, Miss Sabo? The Archduke asked gently. What are your thoughts on this extraordinary situation in which you find yourself? Valeria's voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but steady. I never sought to disrupt plans made by those far above my station, Your Imperial Highness. I have only tried to serve faithfully and live honorably despite. She paused, gathering courage. Despite feelings that I knew could never be acknowledged. Love is not the exclusive province of the nobility, Miss Sabo, Franz Ferdinand said. As my wife would be the first to affirm. Count Cellini pushed back from the table, his face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You cannot seriously be considering sanctioning such inappropriate attachments. The Emperor would never. The Emperor has granted me full authority to resolve this situation. The Archduke cut in sharply. And having observed all parties, I am inclined to favor arrangements that promise genuine happiness rather than mere political convenience. A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Victoria spoke. Your Imperial Highness, my father's concern for our family's position is understandable. But might there be a compromise that addresses both political necessities and personal happiness? I'm listening, Countess. The Cellini estate's borderlands currently held by diplomat Kovacs's family. A marriage between us, with appropriate imperial recognition of his service, would create a significant ally holding in a strategically important region of Hungary. The Archduke nodded thoughtfully. And for Count Esterházy? Robert leaned forward. The Esterházy name and resources would remain committed to imperial service. My younger brother has always been more suited to court politics than I. With your Imperial Highness's blessing, he could assume certain of my duties in Vienna, while I focus on our agricultural and industrial interests. Convenient for pursuing personal indulgences, Count Cellini muttered. On the contrary, Robert countered. The empire's strength depends on its economic foundation as much as its political alliances. I propose to serve in a different capacity, not to abandon service altogether. Franz Ferdinand rose, signaling the end of the discussion. I shall consider all I have heard and observed. Tomorrow I return to Vienna to report to the Emperor. You will have his decision within the week. The days that followed were filled with tension. Count Cellini, furious at the turn of events, confined Victoria to her rooms and dismissed Valeria from service, though the Archduke's interest prevented him from removing her from the estate entirely. Robert found her in the library late one evening, returning books she had borrowed. You don't need to do that, he said softly. Those were gifts, not loans. Valeria turned, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. I thought it best to leave nothing behind when I go. Go? Where would you go? My cousin in Budapest has offered me a position as a governess. She attempted a smile. My father's name still carries some weight in academic circles. Valeria. Robert moved closer, unable to maintain distance any longer. Do you truly believe I would let you go? It isn't a matter of letting me go, she said gently. It's about what must be. Even with the Archduke's sympathy, the Emperor may well insist on the original arrangement. And if he doesn't? Robert took her hand, feeling it tremble in his. If we are given a chance at happiness, would you take it? Would you accept a life with me, knowing the challenges we would face? Her eyes searched his face. You would face social censure. Your position at court would be compromised. I care nothing for court position compared to a lifetime without you, he said simply. These past weeks have shown me what truly matters. Tears filled her eyes. And if the Emperor forbids it, then we will find another way. He raised her hand to his lips. I will not lose you again, Valeria. Not to convention, not to politics, not to anything. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Then yes, she whispered. I would face anything to be with you. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged in the quiet sanctuary of books that had first brought them together. 5 days later, an imperial messenger arrived bearing the emperor's decision, delivered in a letter bearing the Habsburg seal. Robert, Victoria, Count Cellini, Istvan Kovacs, and Valeria were summoned to the grand salon to hear its contents. With trembling hands, Robert broke the seal and read aloud. Having considered the matter of the proposed marriage between Count Robert Esterházy and Countess Victoria Cellini, and upon the recommendation of our nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, we hereby decree the following. The alliance between the Esterházy and Cellini families remains of importance to the empire. However, we recognize that the strength of our realm depends not merely on political arrangements, but on the character and happiness of those who serve it. Therefore, we consent to the marriage of Countess Victoria Cellini to diplomat Istvan Kovacs, who is hereby elevated to the rank of Baron in recognition of his service to the empire. The Cellini Kovacs estates shall be recognized as a unified holding under imperial protection. Further, we consent to the marriage of Count Robert Esterházy to Miss Valeria Szabo, daughter of the late Professor Szabo of the University of Budapest, with the understanding that Count Esterházy's brother shall assume certain court responsibilities previously held by the Count. Both marriages shall take place with appropriate ceremony befitting the rank of those involved, and shall be recognized as fully legitimate unions in all territories of the empire. Given under our hand this 15th day of May, 1879. Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary. Silence fell as Robert finished reading. Count Cellini's face had drained of color, while Victoria and Istvan exchanged glances of disbelieving joy. Valeria stood perfectly still, as though afraid any movement might shatter this unexpected miracle. The Emperor has decided, Robert said finally, looking directly at Count Cellini. Will you honor his decree? After a long moment, Cellini gave a stiff nod. I serve at His Imperial Majesty's pleasure, he said tightly. Though I reserve the right to express my concerns about this unprecedented arrangement. Express them in Vienna if you must, Robert replied. But here, today, we have been granted a chance at happiness. I suggest we embrace it. In the weeks that followed, the palace was again transformed for a wedding, or rather, 2 weddings, to be held on the same day in the recently restored chapel. The emperor sent not only his blessing but gifts for both couples, a public demonstration of his support that silenced much of the potential criticism. On the morning of her wedding, Valeria stood in what had once been her mistress's dressing room, now prepared for her use. Victoria herself helped arrange her veil, a gesture that symbolized their changed relationship. Are you nervous? Victoria asked, adjusting a strand of pearls around Valeria's neck, another gift from the emperor. Terrified, Valeria admitted. I still cannot quite believe this is happening. Believe it. Victoria squeezed her hands. You deserve this happiness, Valeria. You deserve him. As you deserve your Baron, Valeria replied with a smile. I have never seen you look so radiant. Love becomes us both, it seems. Victoria stepped back to admire her handiwork. There. You are ready. In the chapel, Robert waited with Istvan beside him, both men resplendent in formal attire. The Archduke himself had come to witness the ceremonies, bringing his wife Sophie, a powerful statement of imperial approval. When the doors opened and Valeria appeared, Robert felt his heart stop. She wore a gown of ivory silk, simple yet elegant, her dark hair adorned with orange blossoms. She moved toward him with the same grace he had first noticed months ago, but now her eyes met his directly, filled with love and certainty. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Robert recalled little except the moment he placed the ring on Valeria's finger and the priest's words, "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Words that sealed not just a marriage, but a triumph over convention, over political machination, over the rigid hierarchies that had nearly kept them apart. At the reception that followed, the Archduke raised a toast to both couples. "To love that transcends boundaries," he said, "and to the courage to pursue it despite all obstacles." Robert found a moment alone with Valeria in the garden where they had first truly spoken. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, a perfect backdrop to their new beginning. "Happy, Countess Esterházy?" he asked, still marveling at the sound of her new title. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still half expect to wake and find this all a dream." "Not a dream," he assured her, kissing her gently. "A new reality we've created together." "With considerable help," she reminded him, glancing back toward the palace where celebrations continued. "Yes," he agreed. "Sometimes fate arranges things we never anticipated. Like a count falling in love with a handmaiden," she teased. "Like a man discovering what truly matters in life," he corrected, drawing her close, and finding the courage to claim it. As twilight deepened around them, Robert Esterházy held his bride in his arms and knew with absolute certainty that no political marriage could ever have brought him the profound joy he felt in this moment. He had arranged a conventional union for all the expected reasons, only to find his heart captured by an unexpected woman who had challenged everything he thought he knew about duty, about station, about love itself. And in that knowledge, in that love, he had finally found his true place in the world.